Thank you very much for coming. I'd like to introduce to the stage, I was hoping I was going to come up through it, to be honest, with smoke and stuff, but anyway. So on the foresight, Chris Book, CEO at Bardal, audiobooks streamed direct to your phone, what you want, when you want, all for a single monthly fee. Chris Book. Next on the foresight, Richard Godfrey, founder and CEO of iPrinciples, as well as Cody Book, a unique create once, publish anywhere solution for the broad publishing industries with the use of new and innovative technology. Finally on the foresight, Julian Gough, Order of Jude, Level 1, Juno and Juliet of Jude in London. According to his bio, he lives in Berlin, drinks coffee, writes books, steals pigs and sleeps late. Julian Gough. And against the motion tonight, first of all, Mike Goldsmith, who you might notice from your programme has changed sides, and we'll hear a little bit more about that further on. He's the Editor-in-Chief, Digital Editions of Future Publishing. Mike? Sam Holliday, editor of the Bath Chron. The internet tells me the circulation is 18,000, readership 47,000. He might tell us otherwise. Sam Holliday. And finally, on the against side, Robert Topping, ex-Waterstones employee, who famously once said, "Any bookshop can sell the fourth Harry Potter. It's the bookshop which sells the first Harry Potter which matters." Now the owner of Topping's Bookshop. Round about a week or so ago, Encyclopaedia Britannica announced that after 244 years, dozens of editions and more than 7 million sets sold, no new editions will be put to paper. 32 volumes of the 2010 instalment were the last. This is against a backdrop such as the one described by internet visionary Clay Shirky in a now famous piece called Newspapers and the Unthinkable. And I quote, "It makes increasingly less sense even to talk about a publishing industry because the core problem publishing solves, the incredible difficulty, complexity and expense of making something available to the public, has stopped being a problem." At the same time, we have people like John MacArthur, publisher of Harper's Magazine, saying this: "Such mail-order companies as Land's End have learned at great cost that eliminating printed catalogues kills sales and loses them much more money than is saved in printing and paper. Customers may order online, but most of them are responding to a mailing or a printed ad and do not, for the most part, browse in online catalogues." And then, of course, you have such well-known authors as Paulo Coelho, author of The Alchemist, who believes that the web could actually be the saviour of print. And he watched pirated editions of his books, of his digital books, apparently causing huge increases in physical sales. So he went to BitTorrent and created a site called The Pirate Coelho, made all of his books available for free, and obviously much to the horror of his publisher, has seen huge increases in physical book sales because of it. So this is the backdrop for tonight's discussion, and I'm just going to very quickly talk about the way that the actual format works. So we have essentially 7 minutes for each speaker to put their position forward. I will be strict, using my bell, if need be. We will alternate sides. Essentially, we start with the for side. They have 7 minutes, then the against, then the for, then the against, and so on. I'm going to wave at you guys up at the plinth when you've got 30 seconds left, and then I'll be manhandling you from the stage with help of some BG friends. Once all the speakers have presented their point of view, we'll then move to the floor for questions from you guys, so please be vocal with that, and I'll probably kind of corral them up and gather them and point them at the people that you want them to be pointed to. And then each side will nominate a single individual to close, and while that person is just taking a brief 2 minutes to talk, we will have another count up of votes and see if anything interesting has swung. And then to the bar, where we need to drink £300 worth of booze. So the votes as they stand now, 16 people are for the motion, 19 people are against the motion, and we have 20 undecided. So let's see how that swings as we welcome to the stage our first speaker, Mr. Chris Book.
I did have my notes written up on my iPhone, but unfortunately the battery's dead, so I guess that's a bad omen. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the organisers for inviting me to speak at this first ever Bath debate. My name is Chris. I run a startup business in Bath called BATE, which is an audiobook retailer. It's an iPhone app that allows you to stream audiobooks to your iPhone. It's a subscription service, a bit like Spotify for audiobooks. You pay a monthly fee, you can access as many books as you like. Unfortunately, I'm not really placed to, not really qualified to talk about magazine publishing or newspaper publishing, and actually I'm barely qualified to talk about book publishing. I'm a technologist, and I know about making nice applications for your mobile phone. I know about subscription services for mobile phone, but my passion for audiobook has led me to start a business, which means that I have to deal with book publishers. Yes, indeed. And yes, you did hear that right, my surname is Book, so maybe that qualifies me in some way. I love books. Their ability to, the printed word to spread enlightenment and truth, or to lose yourself in a novel is amazing. They're probably the best invention of the last 1,000 years, so don't get me wrong, I'm a massive book fan. But why are we so wedded to this particular format of the dead tree? My basic argument is that I think printed books in 10 years' time will be looked upon like vinyl records. So there will be this niche thing that people will collect, a printed object, and they'll stick it on a shelf. But I think that's about it. I understand that reading words from a dead tree is a uniquely tactile, sensual experience, but is that enough to save this format? Does the change in delivery of those words really matter that much? How did humans, I think we call them customers nowadays, how did we first react when they changed from hearing about stories, hearing about news from word of mouth to something that was printed in a mass market kind of way? In the 1930s, paperback publishing was going to kill the hardback book, but they still exist. Their usefulness in things like libraries, it's hard to wear out a hardback book than a paperback book, collector editions, cookbooks, art books, etc., they all still exist. And that's what, 80 years since the paperback first came about. I do hear though that e-book sales have been massively dented by the digital book, the e-book. People go to their Kindle and their iPad and buy the book on the release date instead of going to the shop to buy a hardback book. Interestingly though, I think that digital innovation probably will save the printed book beyond the 10 years that we're talking about in this debate. Print-on-demand services means that you can go to Amazon or a bookshop and order a printed copy of that book, and ship it directly to you. So I do think that these physical things, these weird objects, will still exist in 20 years. A few words about what I think this switch of formats might bring about. My own area of audiobooks has been a bit of a pioneer in digital. Digital audiobooks have been around a lot longer than these newfangled things called ebooks. Publishers had to shift away from the CD, which was actually a backward step from cassette tape. You can't pause a CD and it stays there forever. You can with a cassette tape. But what happened with the shift from CD to digital audiobooks was the format change. So people started to realise they didn't have to package them up into big CD boxes, and this thing called unabridged audiobooks came back. So instead of having a rather badly edited abridged edition, there was a complete unabridged version. And guess what? The sales of those audiobooks increased. And I think we'll see a similar increase in the overall amount of reading done due to digital. The removal of physical constraints, such as I understand it in book retailing, 300 to 350 page limits for a paperback, because apparently you can't stick that on the front table of a bookshop if it's bigger than that, will certainly disappear. And maybe that will change the creative process around reading. And looking at the recent awards in the last 5 years, increase in size of fiction books seems to be winning the awards. But I'll defer to Mr. Topping to talk about book retailing, something that I absolutely know nothing about. We could also see a trend in niche of shorter books. So in Japan they have this thing called cell phone novels. There's a Japanese word which I can't pronounce. Very short piece of fiction that's distributed and often collated into hardback versions when they're successful. Movellas, a Danish startup, has just launched in the UK to great acclaim, with thousands of teenage girls writing stories, and a few boys, and publishing themselves onto the internet through Facebook and mobile phone apps. Often they're just stories about Justin Bieber though, so anyway. back to talking about ebooks, the convenience of instantly being able to access a huge range of books is undeniable. It's scary how quickly you can react to an article you might read, a radio program you might hear, or a tweet you might see, buy the book on a Kindle or an iPad, and you've spent £8. And also imagine the global impact and the possibilities that might come about where every person on the planet may own a ebook type device. Imagine if that device only cost $50 to do so, to get that in their hands. Imagine if that device could access the internet from a mobile network, and they could access Wikipedia or a simple browser. A printed book can't do that. But it's not all good in the ebook world. There's this awful distraction called the internet. It's called wolfing. I don't know if you've heard of this phrase, wolfing. It means, what was I looking for? You know, that thing where you go off and then you get distracted and about 10 minutes later you go, I had a task to do. Doesn't really happen on the Kindle though, because the browser's shit. But distraction is everywhere, and that is certainly a problem of ebooks. So in conclusion, I believe in 10 years' time, mass market printing of books will be over. I think printed books will be looked upon like the vinyl record is today. Yes, there will be some niche genres where the tactile nature of a book will be a requirement, so that a short print run will happen. I think there will be this print-on-demand surge. And I think in fiction, in 10 years' time, 10% of books read will have actually been read from a piece of paper. So only an increase from today down to 10% of today's numbers. And if that's the case, what does this mean for the economics of printing? Like vinyl records, what premium will these collectors, these niches, be willing to pay to have those words printed on paper? I think printing presses will still exist, but they'll look a hell of a lot different from today. Thank you.
That was astonishing, 7 minutes and 9/100ths of a second. Chris Beck on the Foreside. So from the against side, Mr. Sam Holliday, editor of the Bath Chronicle.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I stand before you as someone who some of you may regard as a member of the old media, a dinosaur, the modern-day coal miner. For I'm a journalist, a print journalist no less, something I've been for nearly 30 years. And if you listen to some commentators, mainly in the digital sphere of course, I'm one of the remnants of a bygone era, because newspapers are dead, aren't they? Or are they? Well, let me tell you, I think they aren't. And why? As a result, I think we will still have an important role to play for many years to come to ensure those printing presses do keep running. First, locally. My job is to be editor of 3 weekly newspapers here in Bath and Somerset, and between them they sell around 30,000 copies a week and are therefore read by 90,000 people. That's a lot of people, and a lot of people who are actively paying for editorial content. And that's important because journalism, be it national, local or international, isn't cheap, and thankfully there are still people who realise that and are still prepared to pay for what they read. And let me tell you a few other facts about the printed press, facts that maybe show that we're not quite ready for the knacker's yard just yet. I'll start with my passion, local newspapers. There are currently 1,100 regional and local newspapers in the UK, with 1,600 associated websites. The local press is the UK's most popular and indeed trusted medium. It has read by 33 million people a week. 42 million unique users rely on their local newspaper websites every month. And of course, they are reading the words of print journalists, because without the print, we wouldn't be able to afford to run their sites. Over 60% of people, when asked, say they act on the advertisements in local newspapers. How many digital platforms can boast that sort of response? And, even in a time of supposed crisis, the local media still employs over 30,000 people, including 10,000 journalists. Finally, and this bitch, from more than 6,100 local newspapers are sold or distributed in the UK every single minute. Bear in mind, all those figures which come from the Newspaper Society website are at a time when many people would have you believe our industry is in its death throes. So that's the local press. What about the national one? Well, in a dying industry, it would be pretty pointless to launch a brand new product, wasn't it? So, when the news of the world died last year, you would imagine, like the dead parrot, it would stay dead. But its readers would migrate elsewhere, some would go to the web, while the others would just wait for all the other newspapers to follow it into oblivion. But hark, what is that I hear? A new paper, The Sun on Sunday, was launched to fill the gap and is now selling 2.5 million copies a week out of a Sunday market that still generates 6 million sales. When was the last time a new product was launched into a supposedly deathbed industry and found 2.5 million customers overnight? And what of internationally? Well, according to the World Press Trends Report for 2010, the figures show that amongst the 69 countries which account for 90% of the global newspaper industry, daily newspaper circulation has barely declined and stands at 520 million copies a day. Yes, 520 million copies a day, and that doesn't even include the sale of weekly titles. The report said newspapers continue to reach a large daily audience of around 2.3 billion people, 20% higher than the 1.9 million reached by the internet. And to all those who say papers are just for older people, the report showed a large increase in the reach of 15 to 24-year-olds in Europe thanks to well-targeted free titles such as the Metro. So, is it a case of crisis? What crisis? Well, not quite. The BATE Chronicle recently celebrated its 250th anniversary, but the only reason we've survived this long is because we've been prepared to change and innovate, and that is what we must continue to do in a rapidly changing media environment. That is the only way we're going to ensure we're going to have a good future to match our great past. The biggest innovation we did, for example, at the Chronicle happened 4 years ago when we became the first newspaper in Britain, possibly Europe, to convert from being a daily title into a weekly one. We did so because we saw that the market was changing and we felt that rather than having a struggling daily title, our community would be better served by having a big, bold, strident weekly. The result is we now have a multi-award winning paper that sells far more copies per edition than we ever managed as a daily and is far more of a commercial success. Other papers around the UK are copying us as well, and it is such innovations that will help us keep the printing presses rolling. But of course, we accept that print is not enough, and that is why our presence on the web and in social media is vital to our operation. Our website isn't our enemy, it's our partner and our friend, and we now actively serve 3 audiences, a print-only one, a web-only one, and the many people who use both areas for different reasons. But, and this is so important, it is the print model that funds our web operation. Show me a news-gathering organisation that is solely funding a large journalistic operation via its digital income alone, and then show the rest of our industry, because none of us can find one. It is very hard to monetise news content online. The reason I think that newspapers will continue is because I still think we offer something other mediums don't. The argument goes that we don't need newspapers anymore because we're all journalists, because we can all be bloggers and we can all share our information. And of course, to some extent, that is true. But answer me this. How many bloggers are currently embedded with the troops in countries such as Afghanistan or in Iraq, or are on the front line risking and sometimes losing their lives in countries such as Syria? There are national newspaper journalists doing all of that as we speak and sending back reports that we need to see thanks to the resources that the newspaper provided for them. And talking of information, can you imagine a blogger doing what the Daily Telegraph did 3 years ago and shifting through 1 million pieces of paper to expose all the details of the MP's expenses scandal? The Daily Telegraph took on the might of the judiciary, Parliament and all of the main political parties to expose what was rotten at the heart of Westminster. Without newspapers, would we have found that out? Or even well before that, would we have known about Watergate? Of course, you can point to WikiLeaks, which has done some great work, but the problem with sites like that is they very often put material out without any semblance of context or sensitivity, which despite all their many faults, newspapers do their best to avoid. So, I stand here before you as someone who believes in digital, loves the web, but still feels that the diversity and entertainment value of the printed newspaper means it has a part today, tomorrow and always. The newspaper industry may need to get smaller, it may need to do some innovations as we've done, but I think it will survive. And if you don't believe that, remember the figure of 520 million sales per day and the fact that on Thursday, 90,000 people will happily be reading the stuff that my guys are writing now, or probably not now. So, in conclusion, we're not dead yet, we're not even dying. And for that reason, if you do own a printing press, I wouldn't advertise it for sale just yet. But if you do, advertise it in a newspaper because you get a better response. Thank you.
Sam Holliday. On the foresight next, Richard Godfrey from iPrinciples and Cody. Thank you.
Thank you. So, thank you for this opportunity to speak, and to BATE Digital and for everybody for arranging this. I think I want to come a little bit stronger than the motion as it's stated at the moment. I think traditional publishing is already on life support. It's probably already dead, it just doesn't know it yet. So I'm the founder of a software company based in Bath called iPrinciples, which is a software incubator, and one of the products that we've incubated and brought out into a separate product is a self-publishing application called Coodiebook, which I hope you'll all give a go at some point today. The interesting thing I hope from me and Coodiebook is that the only way that we make any revenue through that is through people printing it. Yet I'm very much in the fore camp in terms of digital creativity here. My own view is that we've probably been here before. We're in an incredible building with an incredible amount of history behind it. If I think back to some research I did to DBATE 0, which was Aqua Sulis in AD 43, the motion there was paper is killing the stone industry. The chisels will be blunt in 10 years. We had on the pro side the enthusiastic people looking at paper and papyrus. Such cool technology, so fast to write things, so accessible to the masses. Such low cost distribution. You didn't have to lug these tablets of stone around with you all the time. Low cost editing, you could even scrub things out and do them again. The con side. All the workmanship will be lost if anybody can write on paper rather than tablets. If you could change things that easily, then we'll just be dumbing down stuff for everybody to be able to do. And I like the feel of cold, hard stone in my hands. 2,000 years later, I think the tablet's back. 10 years is a long time. Now, my ex-boss's boss's boss, maybe another boss as well, was a chap called Bill Gates. And he said something a few years ago, that we always overestimate advances in 2 years and substantially underestimate them in 10. Just think back 5 years. Facebook, who'd have heard of Facebook? Now, nearly 1 billion users, 90 billion photos, 6 billion photos a month going onto it. The iPhone didn't even exist. That was June 2007. Nobody had heard of it. The Amazon Kindle was November 2007. It sold out in 5 hours. It's the fastest selling product of all time. The state of broadband was poor, something like 1 megabit. And things like Wikipedia was just in a sort of kindling form. It was love it or hate it. Who would believe now that our children are using it as a definitive resource for the things that they do? But whether that's right or wrong, it's happening every day of the week. And this is, like Chris, this is the personal thing for me. I love print, the sense, the touch, the rustling of papers, the personal engagement that goes along with that, the archival longevity that you get through paper and storage. But I think we need to realise that this destiny is now niche. There was Sam talking about the Chronicle and putting a positive spin on the move from a daily to a weekly newspaper. Encyclopedia, as Mike mentioned, moving down to 1% of its revenue in the last few years and now being stopped altogether. Who would have thought of that? Some good friends of mine and ex-colleagues, Martin Old and Martin Thomas, now run the Old School Press. And I recommend you go and have a look at it. It's still printing things, but it's all about niche and historical information. It's really about the survival of the fittest. Things have changed. We have interaction now. The metaphor of turning pages, even though we still use it in Coodiebook, is restrictive. Reading is no longer a serial process. You You look at a book, but you now have links in that in terms of the web. You can link to more detail, you can link to associated content. It's a much richer and engaging experience that tracks people. You can collaborate more. You have more direct author-to-reader collaboration pieces. And I see a good friend of mine in the audience there who's looking at doing exactly this with just ebooks and as a respected author. Acknowledging Mr. Topping's author signings, where authors do get to meet readers, it really doesn't happen in the same way. Distribution is zero cost of delivery, and it's now. It's immediate. The convenience factors of one of these tablet things, there's no need to weigh down your case and take many books when you go abroad. Search, reference books are easy. I know lots of people who buy electronic versions of the reference books they have just so that they can search them effectively. And offline, there's no need to be connected all the time. You can download a lot of the content and get just as many benefits from that. In fact, we've recently implemented one of the major free newspaper mobile apps that includes just that feature. But it's about money. I mean, the thing is driving the money. If you look in the Financial Times a couple of days ago, it said that the press is America's fastest shrinking industry, measured by the number of jobs that have been lost. And the Newspaper Association in the States has shown that advertising sales have halved since 2005 and are now back at 1984. If you look at Future, a great local company, and I'm sure Mike will talk about it in some detail, but the US circulation revenues have slumped 25% and revenues fell 9%. And the UK digital revenue growth is up 36%, and that's offsetting print. Richard. So we have accessibility, authors talking to people, we have advantages in terms of readers and the availability of applications, and then we have ecology. Whether it's deforestation, whether it's landfills, whether it's CO2 emissions, whether it's the transporting of paper, all of these things should be a thing of the past.
10 seconds.
So in summary, I think print industry is doomed. It'll remain for niches, as Chris says, in the same way as vinyl and albums do. It's survival of the fittest. The big question now...
Thank you, Richard. Thank you.
What will we wrap our fish and chips?
They told me to be strict. I feel awful. Thank you, Richard Godfrey. On the against side, Robert Topping.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've heard a lot about niches. Actually, the facts of life in book publishing and book selling, in the books have always been for niches, apart from the myth of bestsellers, and that is how the present industry and book selling is constructed, to sell the right books to the right people, and print be done in relatively small volumes. As a child, I saw the future. I watched Tomorrow's World. I think I saw those programs about how, certainly if not 10 years ago, by now we'd all be wearing plastic and popping little pills for our nourishment. Well, as you see, I'm here in an old tweed jacket, and tonight my treat is going to be to go to the Star to drink a real pint of real ale and Bath. So authenticity still survives. I've got my last child on gap year now in Athens, believe it or not. So Louise at home has been clearing out with a forklift, virtually, the bedroom. And what do we do with all those cassettes? I mean, they bring back fond memories of Alan Bennett reading Winnie the Pooh. Of course, we can't play them anymore. They're all in spools and all over the place. She thought we should keep the boxes to remind us of the physical memory of when those children were young and when we read. CD-ROMs we never went into, but where are they now? Everything was going to take on the book. Television was going to wipe out the book. Never did. More reading than ever before. There was another vision of the future, or was it the present, from that famous economist Keynes. He wrote, "The inhabitant of London could order, sipping his morning tea in bed, the various products of the whole earth. He could at the same time and by the same means adventure his wealth in the natural resource and a new enterprise of any quarter of the world. He could secure forthwith, if he wished, cheap and comfortable means of travel to any country or area of the world without passport or formality. Well, you can tell that's not today. There are passports and formality, but that was the Edwardian age. Now, I'm not a Luddite. At work, I have about 10 screens open at once. Behind the tranquil surface of bookselling, we're engaged in a frantic drive for resource, speed, action, the use of the digital media. They're really useful and a whole part of our competitive advantage. We've better IT than the big people in the book world, like my old employer. And we keep ahead even of the dreaded Amazon people, we think. So we use technology really effectively. But when I get home, I've had a whole day of, what's it called, wilfing. I prefer to engage in a deep experience of reading, of engagement with the author. And the old-fashioned book is what achieves that. I mean, this afternoon I had to do wilfing for this wretched talk, but it's not as good as it should be because I cast aside instead of preparing notes for you, to read John Hegarty. The real man is coming to Bath next Wednesday. He's a genius, he's a maverick, an eccentric. He's written a wonderful book. No batteries required, no wires. I was going to cast it up and it would fall down, and you could see, did it break? It won't. On the train this morning, I had a chap reading the Kindle. It stopped. You could see the expression on his face. This will last, the quality of the paper, the accessibility. We've talked about audiobooks and digital, but it's so much more accessible to be able to turn from page to page. You could admire the design. Fortunately, you're too far away to really view the content of page 50. A naked man with a beard and an alligator doing something interesting with it. But you only have to gaze at something like this to see how superior it is to what Joanna Trollope has called the grey dullness of the printed word. She's chair of the Orange Judges. She's downloaded 140 books. In The Guardian, she wrote this Saturday, she's given up, she's back to physical books. I read that in The Guardian Saturday. During my wilfing this afternoon, did I try and find the quote on the Guardian website? It's not there. You have to find it in the actual Guardian. I consulted some industry pundits because it's very hard to say how things go. Last week I was talking to, we mentioned Harry Potter, Nigel Newton, the CEO of Bloomsbury, Richard Cable, the Senior Publishing Director of Random House, Derek Johns, a major literary agent. We were just at a meeting, an old-style meeting in London, in other words, lunch. No industry professional sees the printed book disappearing in the next 10 years. There are estimates, whether it be 20%, 30%, 40% digital, but in the main, the people who I think know reckon that it will stay mainly printed book. Obviously, an old fogey like myself can say that. What about my children? They're great believers in the printed book. So if I'm not around in 10 years, as they do at the moment, they will still be around reading printed books. And the argument not is, do I prefer digital, or even how many people will be reading digital? There will be enough people around reading printed books for printed books to survive. So really, it's not much of a debate tonight. It's almost self-evident. Printed books will be around. There was a great quote.
30 seconds, Robert. 30 seconds.
30 seconds. Right. In 30 seconds.
I've got my bell ready.
Splendid. It's too early for a lot of us to say what life will be like in the future. If you buy e-books only, and actually 88% of students even these days are mainly concentrating on physical books and printed resources. But if you read e-books only, what will your shelf be like in 5 or 10 years' time? Without books, without the memories that books give, without the memories you have when you read them, who you read them with. In the end, remember, as Anthony Paul said in his
Time, Robert. Sorry to
books
stop
do
you.
furnish a room.
Thank you. Next up on the foreside, Mr. Julian Gough.
I too have brought a book, and I want to read you a quote from it. It's from Gerhard Richter's text, wonderful book. I just bought it last week. It's not in the index because the quote doesn't have any proper nouns in it. It's an excellent quote, but it's not in the index. I don't know where it is. It's not. Sorry, this is unsearchable. Okay, I'll read you this quote. Actually, this is actually quite good here. I can't find a good quote, but I'll read you this one because I can find this one. So this one says that. It's on this page. He says. Oh, sorry. He says. Sorry. It doesn't stay on. He says that. Oh shit. Okay. If books don't even stay open, they've had 500 years to sort out that problem, and they don't even stay on the page. Can you imagine a computer after 500 years of development that only stayed on if you held your hand up against it? I'm not cheating, this is a state-of-the-art book. It's an excellent book. It's beautifully bound hardback. It cost me £35. It was printed in China, who now do the best printing. It's beautifully bound. It was shipped to Berlin once it was printed in China, via the UK, then flown to a shop in an art gallery in Berlin, where I bought it. I flew here with it in my bag. This book has a bigger carbon footprint than Godzilla. This book has been around the world, right? And even when I hold it in my hand, I can't get it to work. I can't find the sentence I'm looking for. The funny thing is, it was printed from a digital file. The perfect version of this, the one that all the love of the publishers was put into, that had absolutely everything put into it, is the digital file, which they sent to China. It arrived about a second later. It was free to send it. It was weightless. It could be read by once it arrived by anyone on pretty much any of their devices in any font size. If I was trying to, I can't actually read it from here, by the way. I would have to go down like this. Okay? I can't blow it up. I spent 35 quid on it and I can't make the letters bigger. The digital file they sent to China was totally searchable, any size, weightless, delivered for nothing. So they've spent a fortune and months of work from many, many people around the world to strip out all the functionality of the original book, which was a digital file, to make it almost unusable. And essentially, all that money has gone into turning it into a brick that cost 35 quid from something that was free, weightless, and perfect. So, why should the printed book survive? If books were invented now, which would win? If two inventors came up with two ideas for the book, one was a brick that physically hurts your back if you carry it to a cafe, and you can't find anything in it, and it costs 35 quid, and the other is free. You can read it anywhere and find anything in it. Which would succeed in the market if we didn't have a history and a historic print industry? Now, people do love books, and I love books, and I write novels, I write literary novels. My first volume of poetry was published last year by a poetry publisher. She lives on the cliffs of Moher, she doesn't have a television set. I'm totally saturated in paper and ink, and you can't be saturated in paper, but I'm saturated in ink. And I do love it, but I don't love the format, I love the contents, and we confuse the two. When people are asked why do they love books, they say, I love the smell of them, I love the feel, you can read them in the bath. Well, in 6 months you'll be able to read electronic devices in the bath. That's just a minor technical issue. And books do not smell nice. They smell like sick. The glue that they bind modern paperbacks with, I think it's made from boiled horses, isn't it? Horses' hooves. It smells like vomit. I don't really sniff a modern glued book. It's not a nice smell. You associate the smell with all the wonderful, wonderful experiences you've had reading books. It's a Pavlovian response. If the only books you've ever read were on a 1987 PC, you would love the smell of dust burning off an overheated Pentium chip. It's totally Pavlovian. We've been through this before with vellum, and we've been through this before with stone. This happens every time there's a new technology. I totally understand where people are coming from, but it's going to change, it's going to go. It has to go, and we won't miss it when it's gone. It doesn't really matter what you want. The economics and the functionality of digital is so superior to paper that paper will vanish in the next 10 years. Once print goes below a certain critical level, the massive overheads of the industry, the enormous overheads of doing all this physical stuff with paper, it will become unsustainable. It will vanish quite fast. It will vanish slowly for 2 or 3, 4 or 5 years, and then it will drop off a cliff and disappear. And you won't miss it when it's gone. We always want to hold on to the old thing. We're always afraid of change. And that was always good in the past, because in the old days, change was usually famine or war. But nowadays, change tends to be penicillin or the iPad. And it's foolish to treat them as though they're probably going to be famine or war. Because change comes, and then when it does come, we resist it and resist it and resist it till it comes. When it does come, we're really glad it's there. And then if anyone wants to change the new thing that we resisted so long, we get angry at them trying to change that. And the whole cycle goes on all over again. You know, when windmills in Don Quixote were the nasty, new, noisy thing that was wrecking the landscape.
30 seconds.
So I think, and I had this discussion with Julian Barnes over dinner. I want to tell you that I do actually know real writers who love books, and we do have conversations about this behind your backs and the secret gang of Julian novelists. And we argued about this. The last thing I said was I used to resist change myself, and eventually I thought it's a habit. I can just train myself to love change automatically and then check afterwards, is it a good idea? And I think you will find that you will all have much happier lives if you embrace change, including digital and the digital book, automatically. Don't even think about it. Just train yourself to love the new thing. And when it comes, it will be great. And you won't waste all your time on worry and stuff like that.
Last up this evening is Mike Goldsmith from Future Public. I'm going to give him a minute's notice just to see if that works any better.
I've got props that I do the script. So, my name's Mike Goldsmith, and I have changed sides. I'm a nice guy. Welcome. And I work at Future Publishing down the road. My job is to get digital replicas of our existing magazine titles onto the iPad and other devices. And since October last year, we've given away 10 million magazines, mostly to overseas customers, 80% of which are new. Settled down at 150,000 sales a month. All good, but I am here to tell you that print is alive and well. And if you really want to bookmark something, just put bus ticket in. It's really easy.
If you know in 5 years' time what you're going to want to look up.
I've got really old bus tickets in my books. First of all, no, not that one. See, you can't index it. This is a copy of Neon. Does anyone remember this? It's a film mag from 1997. It's a bit like Select. Graham Linehan from Father Ted wrote in it. He wrote the back column, and they put Father Ted on the cover on a film mag. That's why it died. Anyone who likes film, anyone who likes film magazines, talks about this magazine. You can find scans of it on the web. I had a conversation with my boss about it today, and he remembered the exact column on the back page of all of the issues that he loved. Right, next up. This is a first edition of Lolita that my lovely girlfriend rescued from a skip while she was clearing out her late aunt's flat, and she gave it to me. Isn't it nice? Don't throw that one down. This in here is Tales of Suspense, number 58, from October 1964. There's a biro goatee on Captain America that you can't quite make out. And I bought it in an American thrift store, quite ironically in a logging town, which had a paper mill. They're all on strike, and now paper's really expensive. Oh, the irony. That's a fanzine that I wrote in 1986, and probably the reason I'm here. I did all the photocopying and binding and stapling, and I sold ads. It's really terrible. I'll put that back in there. And this is the sports section from Saturday's Guardian. It's the Guardian. It's inherently wonderful and beautifully designed, but I rescued it from the bog. I rested my coffee on it today. I threw it out my bedroom window this morning, true story, onto some gravel, and I let my daughter ride her scooter over the top of it. And when I leave it on the pub tonight after 300 quid's worth of goods, I won't really care. This, which is a lovely new iPad, not iPad 3 of course, which is about 500 quid, and we can only buy 2 at Future because there's only a few knocking around. So, all of those things are why print is different to digital, and print will never die. Because print evokes memories. I remember that logging town, I remember that paper mill, and as I say, it's an irony given the current price of paper. Print is collectible, and you could be a collector nerd, or you just like to feel good about it yourself. But the mint version of Tales of Suspense number 58 goes for 800 bucks. That's crap. I bought it in a thrift store. It's like 5 quid, but there we go. Print has passed down through generations. I genuinely do have bus tickets rammed in virtually every book or print product that I've got, and whether it's a filled-in crossword or a biro goatee, it doesn't matter. It just reminds you that these things are not a bunch of pixels. Print is tactile. It feels different from book to book, magazine to magazine. Anyone who's ever worked in magazines or books knows the joy of a cardboard box full of cold print products coming from the post lorry, and just feeling it fresh and new. Print smells, yes, and it smells bloody terrible. If you smell those comics, got 2 more over there as well. Anyone who's ever been to a printer will know the joy. It's, we talk about inking veins, it's absolutely gorgeous, especially if they print the plastic bags there as well. So it takes up space, and the reason that I've got all these props is because I've just had my loft boarded, and I've got a lot of stuff in my house, and I love it. So normally you go, these are all wonderful things, all these wonderful evocative tactile things that everyone has talked about here, and normally I kind of leave it there and say that's what digital will never ever replicate, can never hope to do that. So therefore print can never die. Our side wins, we go to the pub, everyone's happy. But I won't, because I work in digital replicas and interactive editions and lots of clever things like that. Because that kind of tactileness, to bring up the vinyl analogy, that's what people talked about when CDs came along. They talked about having big double prog albums that people used to stay up late night and for nefarious activities. And they nearly died. They've had to become special again, and that's what print has to do. So I'm going to temper my obvious sickness, because this is a sickness, with some words of warning from my day job. Digital doesn't care. Digital doesn't want to smell or evoke memories. It's happy to have widows and orphans. It's happy to have only a handful of fonts. It doesn't care about being collectible. It never wants to go out of print. In fact, it never wants to be part of a finite print run at all. Digital doesn't want to be left on the train. It does want to be left on the train. If I left that, I'd have to go and buy a new one, or save my cost too. But the main thing is, I'm talking about nostalgia, and digital never looks back. It only looks forward for your next purchase, and it wants you to make that purchase because it's going to take a cut out of the recommendation because it's got an affiliate deal with Amazon. It is different to print, and the public want it to be different. They want to share content on Facebook, they want it to be read aloud by a lady robot, they want to buy it on their phones, and they want to change the font, background colour, and the point size. People want choice, digital offers choice, and print does not. And right now, digital is thinking about other things it can do that print can't, because it doesn't really care. And with, I think it's 3.1 million pixels on that iPad screen, and the fact that it can show a font now better than the printed version, it means that print needs to be on its guard. So, where does that leave print right now? The fact, I will repeat this because this is why we're winning, the fact that print can do things that digital cannot and can never do is good. It means it will always, always survive, and anyone who says differently is a liar. Thus, our side wins. Right? However small. But if print is to take the fight back to digital, it needs to be more than nostalgia and more than a bunch of Browning pages that only mean something to old men with newly boarded lofts like me. It needs to be special again. It needs to be even more tactile, more desirable, more strokeable, more sniffable, careful, more beautiful, more special in ways that its buyers would, so that its buyers wouldn't dream of throwing it away. It needs to do what vinyl has done recently and become cool all over again, not collectible, cool again and about the content. And it will do that with the help of digital.
Thank you, Mike. God, timekeeping thing was making me very tense, I have to say. Now it's your turn, to the floor, and I think do we have one or two roaming mics, I'm not sure, but we have roaming mics. So please, if you have a question for anyone on the panel, or anyone at all, not anyone at all, anyone on the panel, please stick your hand up and somebody will be with you with the microphone fairly shortly.
I guess I'll direct this at Julian Gough just because you didn't speak. I thought you were very good, but anybody can answer it. So I love digital. Digital is great. It has a lot of the things that you say it has. But here's a niche that's really important to me. I have kids. I read books to my kids. My kids aren't going to break books. They're not going to suck in the corner and wreck the connections on them. They can share them. They can put them on their heads. My daughter does the most beautiful thing with books. She draws pictures that come in her head, in the margins, and I get to keep those forever. She can't do that with the iPad, she can't do that with the computer. Hell, with the computer, they can't all sit around it at the same time and enjoy it at the same time. I don't think... Okay, I can envisage a world where technology has caught up a bit further and it has some more of the affordances that paper can give you. But there's always going to be those little moments, like I have with my children, where paper is best, where a book is best.
Thank you. Julian, would you like to respond?
I totally agree with everything you said there. I've got a 7-year-old daughter and I read to her all the time. I bought a book today in Topic. I bought 3 books today in Topic. I spent my entire fee in Topic today. I put it back into the local library. And I love books. But what you're saying there is just giving me a really good idea for a digital company, because they should bring out, I mean, if the breaking the problem, that's very easy to fix. I mean, they already make hard laptops for guys working on construction sites. And if you can drop them off scaffolding, you can give them to a 3-year-old, right? So that's going to be fixable. Books that you can draw in, that's a brilliant idea. So there should be children's books where you have an option to just blank the pictures that are there. The kid draws with their finger on the screen their own pictures, and you can say, have that showing or the original showing. That's a really nice idea. They will get all the things that you're saying that people can do with books, they'll be able to do them digitally, and it'll be lovely, and you'll be able to send a copy of that book with the children's pictures in it to your mother, free, in 3 seconds, and she'll be able to share it too. You won't just be telling her down the phone, she did a lovely picture today. All that's going to be fine. All that's going to be fine. Don't worry, the future will have happy kids drawing pictures of it, digitally or not.
Anyone else on the for or the against side? If any of my kids drew in a book, it'd be out their arse, frankly. I don't think I'm supposed to express an opinion, so anyway. We'll talk later. At the bar where we're spending 300 pounds. So, anyone else, please? Hands up. Is it down there in the middle?
I've just been looking at the programme, and it says digital is clean the print industry. Although I'm involved in the book industry, you really haven't spoken regarding packaging, labelling, etc. And publishing is actually not the whole print industry. And I just think that it should be renamed digital is clean the publishing industry, not the print industry.
I was wondering if it'd be good to have somebody respond from either side on that, so I don't know if you guys have printed publishing? No?
I didn't really get it.
Zach,
Are you saying that publishing is on its way out? Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is that it says here on the programme, digital is clean print industry. You've been debating for or against on publishing, not on packaging, on labelling, on all other sorts of printing, which is involved in the print industry. If you rename it digital is clean the publishing industry, then I don't think you've given the full, you've just given one side of the print industry and not all the print industry. That's what I'm saying. Whether I'm for or against it is another thing, but you know, what you're saying is killing the print industry to its time.
thank you. It's a fair point. Nobody was in. Any more? Jump over there.
I should declare an interest as a commissioning editor for an academic publisher called Routledge. And Robert Topping's right that at the moment 88% of students still buy their reading material, textbooks and so on in print form. However, about 5 years ago it was 100%. So there is definitely an increase in what students are buying digital form. But I'm interested in whether digital is changing the way we read and how we read rather than I think there will be a place for print and there will be a place for digital, but I think our reading habits, and particularly those of students, I'm extremely interested in, and I wondered if the panel, I'm not sure which side to address this to, have anything to say about that.
I'll go to the against side. Would you like to respond to that?
Well, there's definitely a danger, I think, of people reading and thinking less deeply and skimming backwards and forth and looking at material. I mean, the evidence for students is that overwhelmingly they're still reading books. I think out today the report says that only 9% of students in the last year have bought an e-book. Mind you, I think 50% of them have downloaded one. A third realised it was illegal to do it, 2/3 guessed it was. I think where's the future for publishing if you can't monetize that intellectual effort on the author and the publisher's part? Maybe that's a question for you.
I think from the student's point of view, we've done some talks recently at PPA and the like, where obviously I'm talking from a magazine point of view, but it was on the day that Apple announced iBooks 2, and iBooks author, the great democratizer that means anyone can get their book and add swirling video and the like to it. There were quite a few voices thinking, saying to us that what you've seen with textbooks in the States and US colleges, they don't necessarily see as coming over here in the UK. There was a few people a lot more concerned about the content, and myself, I don't really care whether that expertise of content and quality of content is coming from print or digital. I don't really care. But really early steps, you know, as a parent, I don't really give a damn how they're getting that information as long as it's getting in there. But I think there's still some way to go.
Over to the other side, 88%.
Yeah, and that's going to go down quicker than any other part of publishing. All of the big publishers, all the big academic publishers are going to a subscription model for textbooks. So university courses will have their textbooks, and you will not purchase a printed version anymore. You'll just have the access for that the year of that university course, and you'll have to, you know, and that means that all the content can be updated, can be bang up to date every single time they go through the process. So I think it'll go from that 88% in the UK, or you know, all of the big American colleges, all the big the university publishers are going that way. Subscription's the only way that that's ever going to work and be sustainable.
Somehow move from where we are now to a situation where everybody on Earth has every book on Earth and can read every book on Earth in any order they want, whenever they feel like it. And that has to transform society in fundamental ways, many of which are going to be good, some of which are going to be bad, many of which are going to be good. Everybody has the potential to be a Renaissance dude. male or female, in Kenya or in London or in Bath or wherever. If every single book was available to every single person, and there's absolutely nothing technical to stop that happening, nothing technological should stop that happening. Somalia, which doesn't even have a government, they all have smartphones. They don't have landlines, but they have smartphones because the local warlords put up base stations on the hills. Everybody can read digital texts on everywhere on Earth now, but they can't get the digital text because we have a set of copyright laws and a publishing industry designed for a completely different era, which did wonderful things in its time, but which is now a huge drag on a potential transformation of human consciousness. So how do we get into that future? I don't know, but it's a question well worth asking, because I don't think it's even worth trying to hang on to the remnants of the print industry and the copyright laws. I think they have to go, and I speak as someone who makes his living selling the copyright of his works. That future would destroy my current income stream, but my income stream is not very much. You don't sell many copies of a book. My novels, I put years of my life into the last novel, and it might sell a few thousand copies. It's sold a couple of thousand so far. It might sell a few thousand more. I wrote the end to a game called Minecraft, which people buy for money on the internet. It's a computer game. It's Times Computer Game of the Year last year, and that's already sold 5 million copies. So if I do something that's digital and can be downloaded all over the world, I get 5 million readers. If I do something inside the old industry, which is fighting for its life, I get 5,000 readers. Which one am I going to go for?
And I think I'd add a little bit about interactivity. Certainly, whether it's coming slowly from the US, it's certainly will come from the US model. And whether that's, I'm sure that will be within 10 years, no doubt. But a key thing for me is, a picture's worth 1,000 words, but what's video worth, and what's interaction with those things worth in terms of a learning experience for people? And why should we not let our children have that kind of experience? They know about interaction, they play video games, that's part of the whole learning experience that they have these days. We should be enriching all of that and making as much of that available as freely as we can.
Does that mean we're going to have a lesson where we always get the TV brought in? Brilliant.
Are you going to run in just masses of sludge without the proper editing and creative function if you're going to accept you're not going to be paid for your creative work? After all, writing a few words for a computer game is a totally different revenue model.
I was paid multiples of what I was. My last 3 books earned multiples less for me than being paid to write that at the end of that computer game. I got paid.
Right.
So what we need is a totally new ecosystem.
With respect, you're not a major publisher writer yet.
We need to get back to the floor. There was a chat just back there. Thank you, everyone.
Hi, thank you very much. Councillor David Dixon. I have the pleasure of running our library services in Somerset, and I can tell you now that more than ever before, people are keen to keep our libraries open, keep real books in those libraries. Our recent survey showed us the biggest demand of our clients was to have more stock in our libraries, and they weren't talking e-books. So yeah, for sure. I also run a print company in the city, and I'm great to see that DBATE there's at least 4 printed items on each of your chairs. But sustainability is, so I mentioned sustainability earlier. How sustainable is it to, again, printed materials to have to always have something on to read a book, to always have that charged up? So my question is, what happens when your battery runs out?
The foresight, anyone like to? You can foresee a future where these types of devices have solar cells in. They get charged by movement. It's just an easy technological problem to solve. That's just an easy one. And I don't think it's an either or here. As Mr. Topping said, he runs a computer or 10 screens throughout the day. Well, that's probably going to happen anyway. And I don't think it's necessarily these things mutually exclusive.
Thank you. Down to this chap here. Oh, no. Okay.
Sorry, you asked how sustainable is it to do something electronically. Certainly in the book case, if you compare books to Kindles, you only need to buy 7 books on your Kindle for it to be environmentally better to have a Kindle.
So the word that you used there that you slipped in was the sludge of publishing. I think I heard that correctly. So isn't digital essentially more democratic form of publishing?
publishing. Isn't the problem that for 500 years we've had a certain class of people decide what was right for the great unwashed to read? And now finally we're able to liberate our creative thinking, and thanks to electronic publishing we can self-publish, and sometimes to an audience of several or even one, and other times to an audience of millions, that we can allow the creative impulses inside each of us to flourish.
I think there's something to be said for that, and I think that is very good, but we've got to remember that how does the great works ever get out there then, in a world where everybody's writing books, everybody's got blogs, everybody's digital? How do you eventually decide what's good, what's bad? How do you find what you're looking for? I remember somebody saying to me, well, I still buy CDs, and somebody was saying to me, well, I don't know why you do that, because you can get all the albums you want for free. And I said, well, if you get all the albums you want for free, how do the artists ever sort of make new music? And they all say, well, bands like U2 don't need it. Well, bands like U2 would never be bands like U2 if no one had bought their records in the first place. And so, there's got, music, just like books, just like journalism, isn't free. Somebody has to pay for it somewhere. And so, yes, there is a great democracy of being able to sort of put a book online, and it doesn't matter if only 5 people read it, that's brilliant. But eventually, I think we're going to want something. We all listen to film critics to find what films to read. We all read book critics to find what books to read. We need people to help us through the absolute morass of information that's out there. And I just want to come back to one point. You said about one day every book in the world. Let's get a bit of perspective here. Bill Gates said, I think it was only about 4 or 5 years ago, when everyone was talking about different technologies, remember that at that point 50% of the world's population has never made a phone call. We've still got a long, long way to go. And in those developing countries is where newspapers are selling better than ever before. And newspapers are getting to people and are educating people in a way that other sources aren't. So, Bella.
Can I just ask Robert, would you like to respond to this chat? Because it's pitching you.
There's absolutely a role for the self-published book, and obviously digital will make it easier, although it's quite not cheap to print a few copies as well, and there are those models. I stand for the role of a bookshop, and there are all sorts of different bookshops, but it is one way of editing and making accessible very quickly a whole vast array of literature that you can look at and browse and assess. I think this model of millions of books that you would own, how are you ever going to get a grip on that?
Thank you. I think Giles over there was next. Thank you.
While I was going over there, I just want to make a point about Sam quickly about how we'll find out about, U2's cool. We'll find out about it from We Love Bath, won't we? That's how it'll come through. It'll be from social networks and not from journalism saying, oh yeah, U2's really cool this week. It's complete fraud. We'll find out because we're so connected to everybody else.
Thanks, Chris. Giles.
I'm a writer with a background in newspapers and now writing for the web as well, predominantly for the web in fact. I'm just curious to know what the panel thinks of the muddying of the waters between print and digital. I'm willing to bet that all of you have electronic devices and print media about your person most of the time, and that there's this mixture of media going on. It strikes me that digital might only be killing print in those instances where print can no longer provide what digital can do better, and yet there will still be areas where print continues to thrive. Another point I want to just highlight is something called Newspaper Club. Have any of the panel heard of that? Yeah. It's a web-based service that lets you print your own newspaper at very affordable prices. And yet, of course, the interface and everything to control it and to get it printed, delivered, is all done over the web. It's an amusing, quite cool little toy on the web that brings together the best of both worlds.
So, I wonder if the guys on the foresight, the hybrid is where the future is that?
Well, I think there's two dinosaurs in this story, and we've only talked about one of them. The print industry is one of the dinosaurs. The other dinosaur is Bill Gates' Microsoft PC era. it's also a dinosaur. It just looks new because it's got electricity powering it. So where we're going that will blur the line between paper and digital like it's never been blurred. We're a year and a half or whatever into the iPad era. It's so early and it's changing so fast. If you want to read something on paper, you'll get something that looks like a sheet of paper. And you'll read it on what looks like a sheet of paper. If you want 2 sheets of paper so you can turn pages, because that's the way you love to have your stories broken every 300 words. You know, you'll have that. You can do that. You can have a perfect. You can have an Uber book with a leather cover, and you can read on its paper-smelling pages if you want. It'll blur, but it'll all be digital. At the back of it all, it'll be digital because digital isn't a format. It's not. Digital isn't VHS. Digital isn't Betamax. Digital isn't CD. Digital isn't any of these things. Digital is a complete transformation of everything, including publishing. Publishing is the smallest of its not victims, because that's not what's happening. But everything will be transformed, and everything you want out of paper you'll have, but the background will be completely digital.
Over to the again, just response to that kind of, the future is the hybrid.
But I think it is, if only because the audiences are different. To exactly what we've found. Before I was closed, I was going to hold up this, which is a launch we just had at Future. Molly makes is kind of for Etsy girls. It's one of the easiest, worst summary that I've ever made. Girls. I'll explain later. The most important thing is reach. It's beautiful. It's absolutely gorgeous. Made a couple hundred yards down the road. It's reached 10,000 subscriptions in under a year. Now, part of that is because it's got such a huge Facebook following, 10,000 Twitter followers, 20,000 Facebook fans. But the digital replica, which is my job, sells to 80% of that region are brand new. So we've got something that is a print success, but for people who don't want a beautiful matte cover and gorgeous paper stock and use words like grammage, people who want the digital version, they're out there, they're different, this isn't cannibalizing. And I think that third way, that fence-sitting way that we're probably all going to agree on, is the one, because quite frankly, people pay for both, not giving it away. And whilst there's money in both,
and the coexistence model, which I think we all really believe in, means this side wins. Because digital and print can easily coexist.
I can add a little bit on that. So when we sort of first had the idea of Coonie Book, part of that was I do everything digitally. It's things are backed up and stored, and I know I can get them. I can watch them on the television. There's photo books and things. My wife is completely the opposite in that sense. She wants to have a printed photograph and share that out and share the experience with people. That combination of two things was really important when we started to put this together as a product. But having said that, and the reason that the opposing side will not succeed is there's no volume to the future. It's absolutely nice to have some of these things occasionally, but it's novelty. It's nuances to things which are peripheral. It is the vinyl argument, and people will still be buying vinyl and printing vinyl, but there's no significant future in that.
Says the man writing on a piece of paper yes to this chap.
Hello, I'm Mark, and I currently work for a company who make iPhone apps. All my work go into apps. We're currently number 3 in the UK. Doing quite well. As children grow up now with Apple Touches or Kindles or any other device, iPads, I think that the print versions will begin to play out. Children, we are reading print books because we had them as children. Children now are probably choosing an iPod Touch or a Kindle over. I think they'll continue to use that as they grow up rather than buying a print book.
Have you ever been into a newsagent with a 5-year-old? They go, you can download that onto my iPad, Daddy, could you? No. My eldest is 5. They've got, you can imagine I take all of my stuff home. It's iPads and Nooks and Kindle Fires, and it's wonderful. And even our youngest tries to pinch and zoom on a screen and dismissively throws it away and it doesn't work. Go in that newsagent like a comic. Now, is that the gift on the front cover? Is that it's bright and shiny? I don't know. I just think that is that.
It is.
A hybrid mode.
That is just temporary, though, I'm sure. That's just one of those tiny niches that probably is not sustainable.
That's what I'm going back with next Saturday. It's just temporary. It's just temporary.
Going back to Giles' argument about this hybrid approach. Newspaper, magazines, or printed books. The only time that I pick up something that's printed on a piece of paper is the Metro, and that's because I know I'm at Paddington, I'm going to Old Street, and I won't be able to access the internet. That's going to change. Virgin Media have got the deal to put Wi-Fi in there by the time of the Olympics. It's over for print. It's over.
Thank you, Chris. There's a lady down here with a question.
Hi, this is for Sam. I wanted to comment at the bottom fact, so I don't think I do. But earlier you said about how print newspapers, they fund online journalism as well. How would you respond then to the presence of the Huffington Post, which is a solely online newspaper with vast readership, a lot of potential to grow locally, nationally and globally, much easier than
The Huffington Post is a bit of a one-off. It's quite interesting today because newspapers get a lot of stick for for what they report, but also for what they don't report. Because now we talk about the democracy of the web, and we all knew that Ryan Giggs was at the centre of that scandal with his brother's girlfriend, is it or something? But we couldn't print it because we abide by certain rules. It was all over the web, and newspapers are sort of constrained by that. And I was looking at the reason I say that is because I was looking at the Huffington Post today, because I think it's attached to AOL now, and there was a story, because I was reading a story online about the Jewish children that were shot, and some of the comments were unbelievable, some of the most racist stuff I've ever seen in my life. And that's democracy for you. Is that all right that stuff's on the web? It wouldn't appear in print. So, that stuff does scare me a little bit. But in terms of that, I think the Huffington Post is a one-off. I mean, The Guardian, I think The Guardian has mentioned it a few times. The editor of The Guardian, Alan Russell, would desperately love to do a web-only version of The Guardian. If he could get rid of print tomorrow, he would. There's no money in it. There is absolutely no money in it. I went to a Society of Editors conference once, and you know what it's like when you go to conferences and you sort of drift in and out of what's on. But there was one on the morning, and it said how newspapers can make money on the web, and there wasn't a spare seat. Everyone was there, and on the panel there was someone from the Daily Mail, someone from the Guardian, somebody from the I can't remember, the BBC were there, and we all sat there like this, pens poised. End of the session, we hadn't written a word. Nobody knows. It's unsexy to send reporters out into the field. It's, you mentioned earlier about change used to be famine and war. I'm afraid change is still famine and war, and the reason we know about it is because journalists tell us about it. But nobody is going to fund, no blogger is going to go to Somalia and come back and do the kind of reports that journalists do.
Why can't the Somalis? I subscribe on Twitter to the Somali, to the Mogadishu Times, to the various Somali websites that come out of Somalia written by Somalis, and they're much bloody better because the people are there and they do it on Twitter.
They're newspaper journalists.
No, they're not. There's no publishing.
Somebody's got to pay these people a salary.
People want to get their story out. They do it. There's a lot of people that just they probably make their money from piracy, but they.
Well, just quickly across to the.
They pirated me as well. I mean, I wrote the first short story that the Financial Times ever published. It was a radio play on the BBC as well, the Great Hargeysa Gough novel, and it was pirated immediately by all the Somali websites. I loved it. I wasn't really selling the stories.
Across the question, just to the guys on the foresight, because this comes up all of the time. Can it be sustained online financially? Can it be sustained? Can money be made in the way?
Not as many people working in publishing or in newspaper journalism, no. But maybe there are too many people working in publishing journalism already.
Somebody said,
why should someone in the middle make a whole load of money for telling you what's happening in the world, for telling one person what's happening to another person? The internet disintermediates. When the Egyptian stuff was happening, I mean, I was following journalism. I was watching it on Al Jazeera, the English, which is a fantastic website, and my daughter was following the downfall of the dictators, and I was telling her all about Mubarak and all this kind of stuff. She stayed up late to see the fall of Mubarak, totally online, and I ended up following quite a lot of people on Twitter who live in Egypt, and now I know what's happening in Egypt directly from people that live there, and I can talk to them, and I can ask them questions if I don't understand something, and I don't need a newspaper to tell me what's happening in the Arab world.
Okay, thank you.
There's authenticity there, Mike, but there's also, there seems to be some implied level of quality that you have to have had a journalist degree in order to be able to do that, and a lot of what I've read in newspapers doesn't have that.
Okay, let's...
No. You become the journalist.
No,
because
you've back. Right, Giles, back to the floor. Giles has got another question. Microphone person.
Can I say my bit was going over to
Giles again? Thank you. My God, it's physical, isn't it? Not yet.
Just a quick point to direct at Sam, and that is that there are some online publications that are entirely online, making sufficient money to fund themselves to pay their contributors. They might not yet be covering international wars, but there are publications like that.
Such as?
The Verge covers technology very effectively.
I'm talking about news, I'm talking about the court stories, what's happening with our councils. You know, things like that may sound very dry, but they're important. If all the newspapers disappeared tomorrow, a lot of people may go, hooray, but who's going to do that Daily Telegraph investigation? Who's going to go? I mean, the Sunday Times journalist recently lost
WikiLeaks, it's called.
Syria.
It's called WikiLeaks.
Sam, this point that I'm quite interested in that keeps coming up is, and Chris kind of mentioned it there, and I think it comes up again and again in the music industry, which is, you know, who said that what has happened up until now is the right amount of employment and the right amount of income coming out of the newspapers? I mean, is it not just the case that there's just too much fluff, and that actually, you know, you can still make money, just not as much as you used to?
Possibly that may be, and I did say at the start, newspapers may have to change to survive, and I think they're trying to do so. I mean, that's a very fair point, and I do take the point that why should every bit of news be edited by somebody in the middle? That's a fair point, and that's where the internet comes in. But at the end of the day, I still think there's a role to play, and I just think, somebody said once in the newspaper industry that we all love the BBC, but we all love it as much if it was the only news provider in town, and that's a very serious risk, I think.
Thanks, Sam. Any more from the floor? Mr. Kelly down here at the front. We've got about another 5 minutes or so. Dave.
Thank you very much indeed. So I think, really, for me, Julian hit the nail on the head about 15 minutes ago when he kind of got towards something that I see as the future and the reason why digital will stop press is running. And that is if in the morning I pick up a film of plastic and on it is my newspaper. You may well have done your job exactly as you normally do, but rather than pressing the button that sends that to the printer, where the printing press is, that sends it to my piece of paper, which I can normally fold up to the side of the chewing gum. Well, absolutely, yeah, but I don't think that's not the question I think we're asking. And I think that not only is that the reason why digital will win, but it's because and again, something you've already touched on, is that in developing countries, they're going there with technology. They're taking things like the what's the thing that Pi? Raspberry Pi. They're taking pieces of technology like that to developing countries because they know that it is a commodity that once it's there, it's reusable. They don't take textbooks to developing countries. Because you physically can, they're taking out tablets that you can wind up that have got things on them. And for me, that also removes and negates nostalgia because people in developing countries who grow up with pieces of technology which content is pushed to, regardless of who puts it there and the model behind it, those people won't have nostalgia. So sure, we might be looking from the UK's point of view, we have nostalgia in books, but as our youth grows up with the sheet of paper that is white for it, so your kids can read it, and all those things, that's why digital content, digital format is going to stop that press running. Because nothing will need to be printed, nothing will need to be shipped, it'll be there on my desk in the morning.
Thank you, Dave. I want to get as many as possible from the floor, so let's have Mark next, and then this chap down the back here.
Very quick, I actually agree with that, but it won't come in 10 years.
Cool, thanks, Mark. This chap back here.
Can I add a one-liner on microphones going down there?
Just a one-liner.
To follow up that, I agree with you totally. The book feels like a permanent thing, because the printed book, because it's been around. It's a format that's stayed in existence for a long time, but it hasn't been around forever, and it won't be around for the future. And Charles Dickens, the novels that we love, they weren't published first as books. They were published in state-of-the-art technology, which happened at the time to be, serial magazines and that, which was very disruptive technology, which the print publishers tried to close down. So
Thank you.
Hi. Permit to look from across the set. I just wanted to make an observation that all the props that the panel used, of course, were all written in English. With languages, obviously, which is a completely different alphabet, and therefore you need a different keyboard to even search for things, etc. Even though you read a which is quite a large niche. That is the fact that publishing for a cultural purpose to explain a story in the native language. I just wondered whether the government was going to talk about taking tablets into developing countries, whether those tablets, whether they would be in English format.
Digital fixes all of that straight away. Like I was saying, there's two dinosaurs, and the physical fixed keyboard with English language alphanumerics is a PC era dinosaur technology. Tablets already have virtual touch keyboards which you can reformat to any language, and Google Translate will translate anything you like straight away, and that's going to improve all the time.
Google Translate isn't perfect, I'm afraid.
Google Translate is about 4 years old. 4-year-olds are usually not perfect. I had one 3 years ago and she wasn't perfect, but she's getting better all the time.
But so the point was, do you see it as an English stream that you're...
Not at all, no, I think it's going to be thorough.
There's a larger niches then that you could use in any native language.
Oh, yeah, I mean, digital's the only way you're going to get some of these languages to have a rich cultural life, because they simply can't afford the print infrastructure that places like the UK and Germany and America have. They simply not going to get some small language in Somalia having a vibrant print existence, but you will get them having a vibrant digital existence, because they won't have to have that phenomenally expensive infrastructure that we have sunk costs into, and therefore feel we need them, but they can't afford it, and they don't need it.
Victoria.
Hello. I was really interested about your point with the technical things going to third world countries, but I wonder whether Sam might answer. Where are the quality writers coming from if you're reading everything in 140 characters, and if all the journalists are kind of, beaten to submission? Writers learn from reading other writers as well as from their own inspiration, and that's how they develop as writers. And I don't think anyone can deny that even if you've watched the football match on the telly on a Saturday afternoon, you buy the sport in The Guardian on Sunday or whatever you read, and it offers a whole new perspective and wonderful words to describe it. And I wonder if Sam might have something to say about where all the brilliant writers are going to come from if everyone's doing everything in 140 characters.
It's a good argument, and I mean, where newspapers are struggling is a big event happens, and by the time the paper comes out in the morning, it's changed, and that's where we're difficulty. What I still love newspapers for is great columnists. I'll buy a newspaper on the strength of a columnist. I'm a big film fan, and anything Mark Kermode writes, I will read, and stuff like that. And you find writers and develop them. I think if there's no newspapers, you're going to have to struggle to find people. You're right, recommendations will come on. Twitter will say, have you seen this guy? He really knows what we're going to. But yeah, I mean, there are very good tweeters, to be fair, but you're right, you're never going to be able to tell somebody in 140 characters. It's a very fair point. And I think newspapers are a breeding ground for great writing, and for great, books. We talk about book reviews and things. Books can live and die by the strength of very good reviews. And you may think, well, we don't want that anymore, we want democracy. But I go onto Amazon sometimes, sorry Robert, and I read half a dozen reviews telling me this book is wonderful, and I don't actually believe that they're written by ordinary people. I believe they're written by some publishing team who says, right, everybody, we're doing the history of the Second World War book today, tell everybody how great it is. And you start getting doubts in it. But if I'm reading an independent book review or an independent book critic, I get more of a feel for it. So, yes, good writing isn't confined only to newspapers, but there's still plenty of it if you go and look.
I really think when we talk about the audiences that we need to ask the people who do this. So I subscribe to The Guardian's iPhone app. I don't subscribe to their iPad app. It was free for the first month when they had Channel 4, and now they're good luck making that work. That's fine. But I bought this on Saturday, even though I could go on the website and get most of it for free and more current. And in the future that you paint, absolutely, yeah, you can see how that. But I bet people will still buy this. And if I could go, I could sit there and go, oh, as it smells, and someone's drawn a goatee on it, and all of that kind of stuff. Whatever the reason is beyond those, he's reducing his speech now to a bunch of cliches, that someone will still do this, and their reason is as valid as anything that we say. So yes, I can see a future where everything's feeding into one and it's foldable paper, and that's not far away. but this will still exist.
All right, just one more, sorry guys, one more from the floor. I think, sorry Paul, I think this chap here, we get his hand up just before you say one more, and then we're going to go to the closing speeches.
I was just going to say that I'm third year student moving into journalism, so I hope I'm wrong here. But are newspapers just killing themselves by having websites and allowing all this online media free? With new generations having access to tablets, to iPhones and other devices that can just let them go online and read, surely that is going to be the way forward for them. Looking beyond the 10 years, and they'll just go online to get their news. But it's kind of catch-22 because it won't be there if no one's paying for the journalists to put it on there, if you know what I mean. Like the newspapers won't be there to put up these websites because it's killing itself.
Can we just have very quickly Sam?
Yeah, it's a fascinating point. I've got some colleagues here that have worked with me in the newspaper industry, and they will know as I do. I've sat in so many management meetings where we've come up with a great new philosophy for how we're going to handle the web. And we've gone from believing it's the savior of our industry to it's the emperor's new clothes, usually within the space of the same afternoon. We don't know yet, but the truth is, and the Sunday Times have tried to put a paywall up, they're not telling anybody what sort of figures they're getting. I don't think they're very good. Nobody wants to pay for stuff they can get on the web for free, but somebody's got to pay to produce that content, and that's my basic point.
Thanks. Over to you.
Good luck in your career. It's a great career.
So I'd just like to refer you back to there's an FT article that was written about 3 days ago.
Brilliant.
About this very, very topic. Now, fortunately, because it was digital, you can go back and see that, and you didn't actually have to buy the paper 3 days ago or rummage through the bins outside to go and see it. But it's a very good point, and it's well covered.
Thank you, everyone. Sorry, Julian. Okay, so now we're going to move into the 2-minute closing moment, and hopefully both sides have chosen a person. If not, do it very quickly while I ramble on. Now, everyone should have an envelope on their seat. If you don't, I don't know quite what you're going to do. Put your hand up if you haven't got an envelope on your seat. In that envelope are 3 little cards, which should hopefully be fairly straightforward, obvious. There will be a tin or a pair of tins or a bunch of tins going around the room. If you could basically just put your chosen vote into the tin.
Mike, why isn't there a digital solution to this?
Shut up, Chris. We'll talk about that later.
Clear bias, paper indeed.
So if you could carry on with this deeply analogue voting mechanism, that would be fantastic. Next time we do this debate, we might have something digital. So we're going to go over to the 4 side for their 2-minute roundup. And if you thought I was brutal before, you should see me now. I'm going to be binging this bell like hell. Looks like Mr. Julian Gough is the man. You have 2 minutes to sum up your position.
I'm going to sum up our position, starting with a very good point made by Chris, which I endorse. Selling 2.5 million copies of The Sun is a very good argument for the destruction of the print industry and its complete moral collapse. It's certainly not an argument against digital. Well, I think that Richard, Chris and myself would agree that there are 2 elements to this. One is that it is inevitable. Technologically, the superiority of digital, which is an infant technology, is already so clearly the case that print can't survive. It's going to be an exponential graph. The next few years it will be quite slow, and when it takes off it will be devastatingly quick. I think that point was well made by my fellow panelists. And the other element of this is that, yes, it's inevitable, but it's also good. It's not a bad thing. It's change towards something that is better for everybody, except print journalists and novelists who make their income from literary novels. But a new ecosystem will arise. Creative destruction is the essence of our society, and we shouldn't worry about the creative destruction of an industry that is noble and wonderful and full of great people who will do other things with their lives. There is a complete psychological... people who support libraries have to support digital, the internet, free technology, piracy, downloading. Not every aspect of all that, but if you are a lover of libraries and think that children need access to information for free, you have to support a digital future. What we have to do is have a conversation about how that will evolve in such a way that the people that are worth listening to are paid to buy the time to put their thoughts in some kind of order for us to engage with. That is definitely doable. There's an enormous amount of wealth on this planet, much of it locked up in hands that don't know what to do with it and are using it very badly. It's very cheap to run a novelist, and it's very cheap to run a good, passionate journalist. They only cost a few grand a year. We'll work out a new way of doing it. Nothing will be lost, everything will be gained.
Thank you, Julian. And on the against side, Mr. Sam Holliday, you have 2 minutes.
2 minutes on your chosen subject, right. Two fonts go into a bar, and the barman says, sorry, we don't serve your type here. If in doubt, resort to a joke. I'm not sure if that's a print joke or a digital joke, but the arguments against print are strong, well-argued, and credible, but they ignore the facts. Nobody's mentioned the hundreds of millions of daily newspapers I talked about. No one's mentioned the fact that this city is heaving with bookshops, and none of them better than Mr. Toppings. And no one mentions the fact that Future is still a magazine publisher that happens to do digital, not the other way around. Print is still alive. Print is still strong. Print is still loved. Print is portable. It's tactile. I'm not even sure if this is a word, but it's shareable. You know, when you read a really good book, I mean, I've got so many books, but I don't know where they are because I've given them to people and says, you've got to read this book. You're not going to give me your £500 iPad to read a good book on it. A book is something you can share with people and share with your children and keep to your children, and children can read it, and it's something special. The Kindle, I mean, people say about, you know, books have a smell. The Kindle's got no smell, and you know why? Because it's got no soul. The Kindle reduces Romeo and Juliet to the same experience as Debbie does Dallas. It looks and feels the same. There's no magic to it, and magic is still important in our experience of reading and getting close to things. We're surrounded by print tonight. You know, you were reading from your little red book all your stuff, and you brought in this book and you said about how when I find a page I can't find a quote. In 500 years we have invented bookmarks and post-it notes. It's not that difficult, you know, and it's still something that's important. And we're going to be surrounded by print in the future. And Robert mentioned about Tomorrow's World, and someone talked about the inevitability. You watch it, they show them again, some of those Tomorrow's Worlds that we used to watch just before Top of the Pops. They used to say that lots of things were inevitable, including the fact that by now none of us would be working at all because we'd have too much leisure time in our hands. It never happened, just like the end of print is never going to happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. What excitement. I could see them being frantic at the back there. I was thinking, yes, a digital solution. No. So, when we started the evening, the motion, digital is killing the print industry, the presses will stop running in 10 years. We had 16 on the for side, 19 on the against side, and 20 people undecided. Following our excellent speakers and their excellent positions on this, which I hope will continue in the bar over £300 worth of booze, we have the for sides with 20, the againsts with 41, and the undecideds at 5. So the againsts carry the motion. No, they don't. They carry the opposite. You know, the against carry the motion.